Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Kane's video of Audra and Nate's tense encounter makes Lily cry. Demonstrates that Lily Winters will grieve over the video of Kane Ashby in the event of a heated argument between Audra Charles and Nate Hastings. At Crimson Lights, Audra will complain to Sally Spectra about Nate's assumption of Claire Newman's statements. Audra would still feel upset by Nate's response even if she was in fact harboring secrets about the breakup plot for Victor Newman. Audra will offer a glimmer of hope that Nate will realize how much they are connected to one another after telling Sally about their departure and how final it felt. Audra will be concerned that the Abbotts will become an issue when the conversation turns to the launch party now that she has joined Abbott Communications. Even though Sally promises to avoid interfering, Audra will still be rather worried. Nate will notify Devon Winters and Lily at Society on his separation from Audra. Even though Nate will acknowledge that Audra might have been telling the truth about the entire incident with Kyle Abbott, Devon and Lily won't be able to believe it. Nate will eventually acknowledge that Claire's account seems more credible. They will make the assumption that Devon and Lily were correct about Audra all along because they won't want Nate to blame himself for giving his heart to the wrong person. On Wednesday's Y&R show, Audra will come in to get takeaway and will briefly meet Nate's gaze before hurriedly leaving. Audra will stop briefly outside and appear upset about what she has lost. In the interim, Kane Ashby will call Lily to see if she has seen his video or heard from the twins. Although Lily promises to notify Kane in the event that the twins get in touch, both questions will be answered negatively. Lily will then go to the park and watch Kane's video message by herself, which will cause her to cry and appear thoughtful. Kane will visit Billy Abbott's home and confess that he is abandoning his takeover schemes. Despite Billy's doubts, Kane will insist that Billy has every right to pursue Chancellor. When Billy asks Kane why he has changed his mind, he will respond that the harm he has done to his children is the reason. Though he will now understand that you can't give someone something they don't want, Kane will also admit that he wanted Chancellor for Lily. Billy will be questioned by Sally when Kane departs because she will arrive home and become suspicious of his presence. Sally will be informed by Billy that Kane has rethought all of his lofty objectives for Genoa City. Billy will have to consider the possibility that Kane wants to make himself look bad by making him look like a threat to the Newmans. While Kane achieves his true goal, that may divert the Newman family's attention. If they can figure out what Kane is really up to, Abbott Communications will have their first major story, Sally will point out. Billy will think about Kane's intention to throw him off balance and question why. Joshua Morrow's character Nick Newman will listen in on Phyllis Summers' irritated message for Kane in the park. Phyllis will say that Kane can't just drop a bomb like that and hang up. Phyllis will be questioned by Nick, who will assume that Kane has already raised suspicions regarding his intentions. Nick will always try to help Phyllis, but she will always insist that she can save things. Phyllis will push Nick to back off despite his repeated warnings that she might alienate everyone and wind up with nothing. Lily weeps when she sees Kane's video of Audra and Nate's tense encounter. What follows becomes a cascading storm that tears apart Genoa City's most intricate bonds and reveals wounds, loyalties, and regrets that no one is ready to face. The video itself is raw, unpolished, and achingly revealing, capturing the exact moment when Audra Charles and Nate Hastings stood toe-to-toe, their voices sharp, their emotions uncontrolled, and their defenses crumbling as accusations and denials clashed in a storm of truth and lies. Lily Winters feels as though she is forced to relive every fragile crack in her own past with Kane, every tear shed over secrets and betrayals, and every attempt to balance her heart's desires with the brutal realities of loyalty and deception by watching Kane Ashby's recording of that confrontation. Tears well up in Lily's eyes as she watches the footage alone in the park, her face illuminated only by the soft light from her phone. She sees Nate's frustration and brokenness reflected in every angry word he says to Audra. She also sees Audra, equally defensive, deflecting and reframes with the kind of clever survival instinct Lily far too well understands. To Lily, it isn't just about Nate and Audra's doomed romance, it's about Kane's reminder that life in Genoa City is perpetually tethered to lies, power struggles, and impossible choices that cost everyone dearly. However, before Lily reaches that moment in the park, Audra herself is the first to fall victim to the drama, expressing her frustration and confusion to Sally Spectra at Crimson Lights. Audra, who cannot shake the humiliation of Nate believing Claire Newman's words over her own, complains bitterly, her voice rising with indignation as she insists that Nate refused to give her the benefit of the doubt, that he clung to Claire's account because it fit into his own doubts and insecurities. Though Sally tries to steady the conversation, Audra keeps circling back to her frustration at being dismissed, her conviction that Nate's rejection is final even as she admits in a softer, cracked voice that she cannot completely shut the door on him, that she harbors a desperate hope that he will remember what they shared and realize how much they still mean to one another. When Sally inquires about Abbott communications, the conversation shifts, and Audra's expression changes to one of fear as she admits that she is concerned that the Abbotts will turn her job into yet another battlefield, especially with the approaching launch party. Even though Sally says she won't interfere, Audra can't shake the sense of impending doom. Her unease lingers as Nate confides in Devon Winters and Lily at society on the other side of town. Although Nate acknowledges that Audra might have been telling the truth about Kyle Abbott and the incident in France, he cannot ignore the fact that Claire's detailed account rings much true. Nate speaks in clipped tones at first, revealing that he and Audra have split up. Devon and Lily exchange a knowing glance, their skepticism heavy in the air, because both have long suspected Audra's motives, and while they reassure Nate not to blame himself for trusting the wrong person, they cannot help but feel validated that their instincts were correct. Nate feels the weight of the conversation in his chest as he thinks about Damien Kane's death, Carter's wrong decisions, and the grief that still throbs inside him. This makes Nate raw and vulnerable in a way that Audra never truly respected. Audra enters society later that week to get takeout, her eyes meeting Nate's across the room for a brief moment before she quickly turns away and flees, her posture stiff with suppressed heartbreak. She stops outside, her facade crumbling as her lips tremble and her eyes sparkle with regret. The weight of what she has lost is pressing down on her to the point where she can barely breathe, and she feels it pressing down on her. While Audra battles her turmoil, Kane dials Lily, his voice steady yet carrying a quiet intensity as he asks if she has seen his video or heard from the twins. Lily, who is still in shock, says no to both questions but says she will let him know if the twins try to contact her. Their call is brief, almost clinical, yet it reverberates in Lily's chest like an echo of a life she once shared with him, a reminder of the ways Kane always found to tether her back into his orbit, whether she wanted to be there or not. So, unable to resist, Lily goes to the park, plays the video Kane sent her, and opens it. Lily feels her own barriers fall away as Nate's wailing voice, Audra's defensive responses, and the tension between them fill the screen. She lets her tears flow freely as she watches, her sobs muffled against her sleeve because what hurts the most is not just what she sees but also how Kane chose to show it to her and how he knows exactly which strings to pull to remind her of their entanglement, shared scars, and shared griefs. Kane himself is at the same time making decisions that perplex others. He announces that he is abandoning his plans for a takeover when he shows up at Billy Abbott's house with an exhausted expression. Billy, still skeptical, asks him if he is sincere and why a man who has planned and maneuvered for years would suddenly change course. Kane insists that he cannot continue pushing when the people he claims to love are being broken because of his children and the damage he has done. Even though he now understands that no gift or empire can replace what someone does not want to receive, he even admits, with a quiet vulnerability, that he wanted Chancellor for Lily rather than for himself. He wanted to give her what he thought she deserved. Billy listens, torn between suspicion and empathy, but Sally's arrival complicates matters as she notices Kane's presence and later questions Billy about it. Once Kane leaves, Sally presses harder, and Billy reveals that Kane has supposedly abandoned his ambitions. Sally, however, becomes more thoughtful as Billy explains Kane's words, suggesting that Kane might just be changing tactics, that by portraying himself as reformed, he might be diverting attention from his true goal and distracting the Newman family. Billy cannot dismiss the possibility, and he begins to suspect that Kane's real game is to throw him off balance while quietly advancing another agenda. Billy is informed by Sally, sensing a story, that Abbott Communications may have their first big scoop if they discover the Ide and what Kane is really plotting. Lily's tears over his video are more than just tears of grief. They are also a sign that she is aware that Kane continues to influence her life in both planned and unplanned ways. The confrontation is more than just a breakup for Audra. It marks the beginning of an unraveling that she can't stop. For Nate, the argument is more than betrayal, it is a mirror of his own vulnerabilities. And for everyone else, Kane's supposed retreat might just be the calm before a far more calculated storm, A storm that no amount of tears, denials, or promises can contain. What could have been a private argument between Audra Charles and Nate Hastings turned into a saga that spilled into Genoa City's coffee shops, corporate offices, and family homes, poisoning trust and planting doubts everywhere. The truth, once captured on film and passed from one hand to another, loses the intimacy of its origin and becomes a weapon, a mirror, and a story for others to interpret. And that was precisely what Kane Ashby had set in motion. Regardless of whether as she walked home, Lily Winters, still shaken from watching the video in the park's dim lighting, tried to regain her composure. However, the weight of those images followed her like shadows. Audra's sharp defensiveness, Nate's trembling voice, and, most importantly, the knowledge that Kane had been the one to film it. She felt as though Kane's eyes were still on her, silently asking her if she understood what he wanted her to see. By the time she reached her front door, her face was streaked with tears she hadn't managed to wipe away, and she lingered there, staring at the wood grain, wondering if she should call Nate, warn him, confess that she had seen his humiliation on screen, but instead she let her phone rest heavy in her hand, uncalled numbers burning in her contact list. Audra, on the other hand, had her own thoughts in the privacy of her apartment. She paced like a caged animal, clicking her heels against the hardwood as she replayed her conversation with Sally at Crimson Lights and Nate's devastating chill when he confessed to Devon and Lily that their relationship was over. She resented the idea that others now pitied her, that Devon and Lily, of all people, saw her as the predictable manipulator who had finally been caught. And she poured herself a glass of wine and tried to drown the memory, but it returned anyway, as if Kane himself had slipped into her thoughts, holding up the video as proof of her downfall. Nate tried to convince himself that the breakup was inevitable, that Claire Newman's words had only confirmed what he already knew, that Audra was incapable of honesty, that she would always twist and reframe until he doubted his own instincts. But still, a part of him ached because letting go of Audra meant admitting that he had once again failed to see the truth until it was too late, just as he had done with Elena, just as he had done in countless. His phone buzzed with messages of support from Devon and Lily. Their reassurances well-meaning but almost unbearable, because they reminded him of the family he had disappointed, the standards he had fallen short of, and though he typed out thanks, he left the messages unanswered, retreating deeper into his solitude. Kane entered Billy Abbott's study once more at that exact hour, uninvited but purposeful, carrying the calm of a man who had already planted enough chaos to step back and watch it grow. He told Billy that he had abandoned his plans for a takeover and that he was now only focused on his children, but Billy, who was sharp-eyed and restless, wasn't convinced because he had seen far too many men in Genoa City say they were sorry only to strike harder when the time was. Their exchange grew tense as Billy pressed him, asking why he had chosen this moment to quit, why he suddenly cared about damage done, and Kane, unflinching, admitted that watching Lily cry had broken something in him, that he had realized ambition was worthless if it left her wounded. Yet, in the back of his mind, Kane also relished the fact that Lily was crying over something he had given her, the video, his message, his lingering presence, and that contradiction fueled Billy's suspicion that Kane's surrender was merely another calculated pose. When Sally arrived later and pressed Billy for details, Billy confessed he couldn't shake the feeling that Kane wanted him off balance, wanted the Newmans distracted, wanted everyone watching the wrong direction while he moved quietly in another, and Sally, intrigued, suggested they dig deeper, that Abbott Communications could solidify its reputation if they were the ones to expose Kane's true agenda, whatever it might be. Phyllis Summers was relentless, insisting that she had control, that she could manage Kane, and that she didn't need Nick's interference, despite Nick Newman's efforts to warn her not to let Kane pull her into another destructive spiral. Nick Newman was still reeling from Phyllis Summers' sharp tongue in the park, and her angry voicemail to Kane was still rattling in his ears. Later that evening, as he sat at Society and watched Lily enter with red-rimmed eyes and a distracted air, he thought back on their argument and wondered if Kane's shadow might have encompassed Phyllis, Lily, Nate, and Audra all at once. Audra threw herself into work the following morning, barking orders and demanding precision for the upcoming launch, but the harder she tried, the more obvious it became that she was unraveling, as her temper was short, her decisions were impulsive, and her smile was absent. She was determined to project strength even as whispers about her breakup with Nate rippled through the staff. She met Claire Newman at lunch, and even though they only talked briefly, there was unspoken tension between them. Claire was calm and measured, and she had the quiet power of being believed. while Audra was stifled by the realization that Claire's word had been more important to Nate than any of her protests could ever have been. Audra then sat in her car in the Abbott parking lot, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white, and whispered Nate's name in the hopes that saying it aloud would bring him back and break the chain of events that Kane had captured and spread. Devon, furious, declared that Kane had no right to involve her in his machinations, that his so-called change of heart meant nothing if he was still manipulating emotions through recordings and messages. However, Lily admitted through her tears that part of her still believed Kane's remorse was real, that seeing him abandon his schemes for the sake of their children might mean he was finally ready to let go of the past. Lily was unable to keep the burden of the video to herself. Devon, always protective, warned Lily not to fall for Kane's tricks again when the cost had already been so high. Lily promised not to, despite the fact that Lily knew the promise was tenuous. Even though Nate smiled at the child, his heart was heavy because every reminder of family only emphasized what he had lost and the mistakes that had brought him here. Across town, Nate received an unexpected visitor, Abby Newman, who brought Dominic with her for a brief visit in the hope of cheering him. Abby, perceptive, asked softly if this was about Audra, and Nate, sighing, admitted yes, but also no, that it was about every choice that had led him to a place where he doubted himself, where he couldn't tell love from manipulation until too late. Abby urged him not to isolate himself, reminding him that connection, not isolation, is the key to healing. Nate, tired, just nodded, thinking back to the video and the look in his own eyes as Kane's camera caught him trying to keep his dignity while failing. Phyllis, who was always restless, started looking into Kane's recent actions, convinced that his call to her had a deeper meaning than he had admitted. She connected the dots between Kane's visits to Billy, his sudden abandonment of the takeover, and the release of his video at the right time, her instincts telling her that Kane was moving towards something bigger. She left another message for him, demanding clarity, demanding answers, while Nick watched helplessly, knowing she was hurtling toward another disaster but powerless to stop her. And so, as another day closed in Genoa City, the city pulsed with the aftermath of Kane's recording, Lily haunted by tears she couldn't stop, Audra clawing for control she couldn't keep, Nate drowning in guilt he couldn't escape, Devon seething with protective anger, Billy torn between suspicion and grudging respect, Sally hunting for the story of her career, Phyllis chasing shadows, and Nick trying to anchor her to reality. And through it all, Kane remained the quiet conductor, the man whose video had struck a chord that no one could silence, leaving the question of whether he was truly repentant or merely preparing his most dangerous move yet. As the hours turned into days after Kane's explosive video shook Genoa City, the fallout only deepened, layering new betrayals and fresh suspicions on top of already fractured relationships, with every character in the orbit of Kane, Audra, Nate, and Lily feeling the weight of decisions they had not made but were now forced to live with. And the truth was, the longer Kane stayed silent about his intentions, the more everyone filled in the blanks with their own fears and theories, and that silence became its own kind of weapon. Lily Winters, still shaken from crying alone in the park, tried to move forward, immersing herself in work at Chancellor Winters, but Devon noticed how distracted she had become, how her hands lingered too long over her phone, how her eyes glistened when she thought no one was watching, and he pressed her, demanding to know what Kane had said or done this time, because Devon, more than anyone, knew how Kane had a way of re-entering Lily's life in moments of weakness, always with just enough sincerity to keep her wondering if he had truly changed, and though Lily tried to downplay it, Devon's instincts caught the tremor in her voice when she admitted she had seen Kane's video, that it had hurt her deeply, not just because of what Nate and Audra said, but because of the way Kane had chosen to deliver it, as if he wanted her to feel something, as if he wanted her to relive her own history with him through the lens of Nate's heartbreak. Devon grew angry, insisting that Kane had no right to drag her into this mess, that he was exploiting Nate's pain for some unspoken agenda, but Lily, with tears in her eyes, whispered that part of her still wondered if Kane's change of heart was real, if his decision to step away from Chancellor was his way of protecting not just his children but her too, and that admission unsettled Devon even more, because he feared Lily's compassion might once again leave her vulnerable to Kane's manipulations. At the same time, Nate Hastings, who had been spiraling since the breakup, found himself haunted by the sight of his own anger on screen, his own voice raised and cracking as he confronted Audra, and though he wanted to believe it was righteous indignation, He couldn't shake the sense that he had let himself become vulnerable in front of someone who now no longer respected him, and worse, that Kane had weaponized that vulnerability by recording it. Nate spent sleepless nights at the Tack house, pacing, drinking, staring at his reflection in the window, hearing Claire Newman's voice replay in his head, her calm assurance that Kyle Abbott had not crossed the line, her insistence that Audra was twisting the narrative, and while Nate had believed her in the moment, he now questioned if trusting Claire so fully had been its own mistake, because what if both women were playing him? What if everyone was simply spinning stories to protect their own power? His paranoia deepened when he saw Audra at Abbott Communications, her head held high but her movements brittle, her eyes darting too quickly when their gazes met across a crowded event, and though she hurried away,